big ones, and they were leaked ahead of time. I feel sorry for a poor T-Mobile Arena employee who put up this graphic on the arena before it was ready to be announced, but it is official. UFC 285, March 4th, there will be a new heavyweight champion crowned as Ciryl Gane takes on Jon Jones. The fight that Dominic has been clamoring for forever at this point. He gets it. It is a massive fight, but there is so much to dig into here, Dom. Yes. You obviously have the element that this is for the undisputed heavyweight title. Francis Ngannou is now stripped of the title. He is also free to sign wherever he wants in the UFC. They have essentially cut ties with Ngannou. Just a lot of craziness, Dom. I'm curious, your thoughts. We'll start with just the matchup itself. This being the headliner, March 4th. No co-main announced yet. But just, maybe explain to the people why this has been the fight that you have been most wanting to see for a long time.
Yeah, this is to me the highest level fight that the UFC can make right now, in my opinion. Like, obviously we have Islam versus Volt coming up in February, and that's outstanding, right? Champion versus champion. So if there's anything that's close to it, it would be that one. But man, Ciryl Gane just looks like one of the most special talents that the heavyweight division for sure has ever seen, and honestly the UFC as a whole. The way that he can move at that weight, and Dana kind of said it last night, he's a heavyweight that moves like a middleweight, and it's just ultra impressive. Jon Jones is looked at by a lot of people as the best fighter of all time, and if he's not your best, he's probably in your top 3, top 5 at worst. So the fact that they get to match up together, Jon Jones finally making his debut at the heavyweight division. I believe, Noah, he first mentioned wanting to do this in 2013. So 10 years later, we are going to get to see that debut, and it comes against a special talent like Gane. I don't think it gets much better than this. Like, obviously, if Francis was still the champion, and we'll get into that a little bit more, him versus Jon is a great fight. Don't get me wrong. But if we're talking all around skill sets, tit for tat, matchup styles, everything, this is what you want. If you love the sport of MMA, I couldn't be more excited for this fight getting announced, Noah.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent test for Jon Jones at heavyweight because we know what kind of challenge Ciryl Gane will bring in terms of striking. And then if all else fails, Jon Jones maybe goes into for his wrestling and is able to utilize that. So we'll get to see really just how good a 35-year-old Jon Jones making his debut at heavyweight after being off for what will be 3 years at this time. It's completely unpredictable what kind of fighter we're going to get in there. So much has happened since then, both good and bad for his career. And you have the layoff mixed in with the age, mixed in with the new division. He looks good. He looks big. He looks like he's filled out at heavyweight. He took the proper time to get his body ready for a new division, put on the pounds the right way. Now it's just time to see what kind of fighter he actually is at heavyweight. And against a guy like Ciryl Gane, if he could go in there and beat Ciryl Gane, that would just show so much in terms of the all-time status and just how the legacy of Jon Jones, for whatever it's worth. I understand that so much of what's happened with him outside of the octagon sort of is like the black cloud over his legacy. But you can't deny in terms of his athletic achievements, this would be up there for his legacy as a fighter if he were to come out on top in this fight. I'd be curious what the opening odds are for this. I think, is Jones a slight favorite or is he a slight underdog? Because I almost feel like he should be an underdog in this fight.
That's actually a really good question. I have not seen or heard, but I can try and check.
Well, while you do, I think we'll address the Francis Ngannou portion of this announcement. And, for me personally, I know Dom said this is the fight he's most been looking forward to. For me personally, I am disappointed that they couldn't get a deal done with Ngannou. I think everybody is, but I think one of the reasons, I guess, for that is because I thought a fight between Ngannou and Jon Jones was just massive. Don't get me wrong, a fight with him and Ciryl Gane is great. It's big, but I thought a fight between Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou was even bigger. I thought it was an even bigger test for Jon. You take on the guy who beat Ciryl Gane just a year ago and has the biggest KO punching power the division's ever seen, and he looks like he's making his game even more well rounded. Taking on Jon Jones, who would have been much smaller than him, but obviously has such a great skill set in his own right. But then you still take in the factors of 35 years old, 3 year layoff, all that. So I think I was more interested in a Jon Jones and Ngannou fight. But once this fight was announced with him and Gane, it's huge. It's massive. It's a big fight. It's a big deal. I'm excited for it. So really, that's like splitting hairs. But the bigger part of this, Dom, is that Francis Ngannou is a free agent now. Francis Ngannou is stripped of the title. He is now free to sign wherever he wants. They have waived any sort of matching clause or anything from his contract that would keep him in the UFC. He is no strings attached, an unrestricted free agent at this moment. And I can't help, Dom, but feel like, when we saw that picture come out that I believe Ngannou had posted, and you saw one of his family members wearing that PFL shirt, and people were like, does this really mean anything? And at the time, it was kind of, I think I even kind of subscribed to the belief of, it's probably just a negotiating tactic, like not really something he's actually, thinking about doing. It just seemed implausible that this guy, who was like the best heavyweight in the world and could get the biggest money in the UFC, you would think that he would go to the PFL, who is a smaller promotion. But the more you really think about it, PFL just signed Jake Paul to their pay-per-view super fight division. They obviously are willing to shed out some money to really try to take this PFL thing to the next level. And they are serious about this pay-per-view super fight division. I'm not super confident in it, but they are proving that they are really trying to get behind it and put resources into it. So Dominic, I think in the next couple weeks, Francis Ngannou will be signed to the PFL Super Fight pay-per-view division. That's always a mouthful to say. What were your thoughts be on that? Do you think that would be a good career move for Francis Ngannou, or do you feel like do you feel like there'd be, I don't know, like would you really be able to sort of, I guess as a fan, because I don't expect you to like critique his career move and say like, well, it's a bad career move when he's ultimately the one thinking it's best for him. Like, I'm not trying to put you in a position where what's best for him. But in terms of his legacy as a fighter, in terms of where he stands in his career right now, do you feel like as a fan this is a good career move for him?
I think now that the UFC is basically out of the picture, it's the best possible career move for him, to be honest. I feel like Francis got to a point where he was fighting. I mean, he was a very active heavyweight for a long time. Don't look at this past year as like any outlaw, like it's an outlier, right? Because he was always fighting a lot. He was fighting very, very good fighters and beating a majority of them. So he kind of reached the pinnacle of the UFC. He was the champion. He was able to, have those big moments. And with the injury and everything, I feel like it put a lot of clarity into his head, like what is really going to make the most sense for me moving forward. I've kind of done it all here. So financially, he's looking to get set up the best that he can. And if that is in the PFL, that is 100% what he should do. And I think it's 100% what he is going to do. It is funny to look back on that picture that you mentioned. At the time, we never even really got to talk about it on here because it came during that kind of lull period. I was kind of in the same boat as you. Like, I mean, she's not wearing it for no reason, but maybe it's just like Noah said, a negotiating tactic, wanting to kind of leverage the UFC. But now I feel like you have to look into that even more so. I feel like he's probably maybe even already had a couple discussions, or at least his management team with the PFL, I think things are now going to move relatively quickly. He will be in the PFL for a chance to get his opportunity to box, like he's been talking about and wanting to do for massive money, to be in the super fight pay-per-view division with the 50-50 revenue share. Do with that what you will with how the buys will be, but still it'll be a lot of money. And I think there's an opportunity for him to compete in the season format as well and add another $1 million on top should he win the whole thing. Massive, massive financial opportunities are here for Francis, and I think he is absolutely going to capitalize on them, Noah. I don't even, it's like 95% to me that that's where he's going, the PFL.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. But I guess my actual question though was that I understand the UFC have now cut ties. But let's say the UFC was still interested. If he could go back, if he would have signed back, been the UFC Heavyweight Champion, and you have a fight with Jon Jones or Ciryl Gane or Stipe that you could potentially have next, versus what he would get with the PFL, the potential money-making opportunities. My question is that the right career move for him? Because it's not that the UFC didn't want him back. He's choosing to bank on himself, to bet on himself and go elsewhere because I'm assuming, didn't feel like the UFC's offer was enough for his liking. Even though Dana said it was the biggest contract that a heavyweight would have ever gotten in the UFC's history. He felt like he was worth more, so he is going to find more. Do you feel like it's the right move, though? That's the question. Like, do you think him leaving the UFC to go to what is a smaller promotion, but potentially to make more money, have maybe more freedom, more avenues to make money, and then everything else you just said, is that the right move for that in your belief as a fan, without knowing his current situation? Do you think it's the right move?
I think it is. I really do think it is. Going back to kind of what I said with how in his head, I feel like he probably just figured he's done it all in the UFC. Why not gamble on myself, as Noah said? Selfishly, of course, I'd love to see him fight, Jon Jones, have a rematch with Gane, a trilogy with Stipe or something like that, whatever. I do find myself saying yes, that I think it is the right career move for him. I think it's just going to set up a lot of cool things that we may get to witness him do that we wouldn't have necessarily got the chance to see inside the UFC. I feel like 2 years ago, if you asked Dom this question, I would have said no and went on a tangent about how he needs to fight the best, blah, 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 build the legacy. But I don't know, man. I feel like his legacy's kind of there. Like the hardest hitter ever in the UFC, became a champion, been there, done that. Now he's wanting to experiment, take chances, do some cool shit in this time period where it feels like the PFL is really at the forefront of that for the MMA world and MMA space. I like it. I really do think it's the right decision.
I think time will tell. I see what you're saying. I think a lot of those money making avenues could be great, but he is sort of going into something that's not a given right now. Like, the PFL is yet to really prove that they can consistently do a pay-per-view super fight division, that they can continue to charge people for pay-per-views, put on fights on pay-per-views that people are willing to buy, so that it is worth getting guys like this or Jake Paul who can make a 50-50 revenue split. 50-50 revenue split don't mean a lot if 50,000 people are buying the card.
Right.
You want more than that. So he's definitely betting on himself here, which I fully support and think that more people should do that. I think time will tell if this is really the right move, but I do think he's taking a lot of risk here because, Dom, I could totally see, the PFL tends to do a better job in marketing their fighters or promoting their fighters and fights than like Bellator does. But there's a good chance in like 2 years, Ngannou's going to be kind of irrelevant. Like, he would still be, even if he's heavily promoted or whatever, like, as big of a star as this guy was bubbling to be in the UFC and had really become, I could see in a couple years, if this PFL super fight division doesn't really hit the ground running, what boxing opportunity is there going to be? He's no longer the UFC heavyweight champion. Like it or not, a lot of these opportunities that were at his disposal with the whole boxing Tyson Fury or whatever, a lot of that came because he was the UFC heavyweight champion. What's ironic about that is he can't get those opportunities while being the UFC heavyweight champion. But a lot of the reason why people were interested in him for those opportunities were because he was the UFC heavyweight champion. So it's like you have to leave that organization to get to that opportunity. But then once you leave it, all of a sudden the thing that was kind of getting you there is no longer attached to you. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the audience, I guess, perceives this move. How long term, in 5 years, is Francis Ngannou going to be a star? Is he going to be one of the biggest names in the sport? Will he be a bigger version of Fedor in terms of MMA fans? Or will he become sort of irrelevant? I think either one's on the table, but I don't blame him for taking the chance.